Hi guys, good evening. Thanks for joining me. We're going to be talking about exploratory testing today, but not just exploratory testing, about the right blend of automation, functional and non-functional, of course, but with that supplemented with that human-led exploratory testing effort. All right, so we're going to focus on the issues of having too much manual testing. All right, quite clearly that becomes a bottleneck. When we tend to have an automation only focus, that can lead to too narrow, too shallow test coverage for delivery. And conversely, some organizations with an extreme kind of shift left mentality, we see situations when a developer only testing strategy gives you a narrower perspective on testing as well. And the idea of the differences between testing versus checking, all right, which is really what automation is all about. All right, so in truth, the most mature agile organizations have that good blend. They have both in place, right? We have high levels of automation, 75% plus. And then the testers, the autonomous, the independent testing team within an organization, if they exist, hopefully they do, have the time, the support, the encouragement to go off the beaten path a little bit and do that exploratory testing, which is where we believe certainly you're going to find the most edge case, serious, those nasty bugs that you want to find and you don't want your users to find. All right, so getting the right blend of those is what we're going to focus on today. Really understanding what exploratory testing is if you're not that familiar with it. But then we want to introduce you to a new feature within Test Evolve Halo that really for the first time we feel makes this possible to track, to cover your exploratory testing and to bring it alongside in one central reporting platform alongside your automation testing as well. So it gives you that really holistic view of quality of your applications within your organization, your projects from that double perspective. All right, so that's what we're going to talk about today. Thought I would start with some familiar case studies. All right, so we've got one from last year and one from very, very recently as well. As testers, I would probably imagine almost all of you will be familiar with these to some extent or another. So one from last year, the summer of last year, I was personally affected by this in the sense that I had to drive from London to Amsterdam to pick up my wife who was stranded at Amsterdam airport because of this issue we see ahead of us. All right, so this was the UK air traffic control system, effectively. All right, so in a nutshell, what happened was that the system fell back to a manual process. All right, so running flights and airports and international travel on a manual basis, of course, is is not the best idea, and yet that is the fallback plan, right? So let's just look at what happened here. So we're in a situation here where a flight plan was submitted by an airline for a particular flight. All right, I'm just going to focus on some of the key points, and essentially a flight plan was submitted that had duplicate codes. So you have these 5-letter codes, and flight plans are submitted containing these codes. Cover a variety of different things, when they enter and exit air traffic control spaces. But what we can see here, there's a particular code in this situation, DVL, all right, and that code is actually representative of two places, right? It's Devil's Lake in North Dakota, but also a place called Deauville in France. So as far as the process is concerned, this flight plan was submitted in a perfectly acceptable way. All right, it didn't violate any particular standards at the time, didn't throw any alarms at the time. All right. However, when that plan was submitted, further down the line, we understand that the computer system at the air traffic control center, has a different perspective on that. All right, so we see here the air traffic control company responsible for planes flying through UK airspace had a very different perspective on this. All right, what happened here? When a flight plan containing duplicate codes for different beacons reached the NATS HQ, it triggered a chain reaction, and the end result, over 700,000 passengers facing disruption at one of the busiest times of the year. This is August of 2023, in the peak of summer travel. All right. What was the kind of the root cause of this? Right. So the UK air traffic control system, quote, identified a flight whose exit point from the UK airspace, referring back to the original flight plan, was considerably earlier than its entry point. All right, so recognizing this as not being credible, a critical exception error was then generated. Now, I've marked this next bit as green because effectively it did what it thought it had to do, what it had been told to do, what it had been programmed to do. But the system placed itself into maintenance mode, all right, a safety measure to prevent the transfer of apparently corrupt flight data to the air traffic controllers. All right, the net result being automatic processing of flight plans ceases, and we fall back to a manual process. So, in short, quite a simple sequence of events there. Nothing at fault at the start of the process, in which the process by which the flight plan is actually is constructed and submitted to start with. But when it then comes to processing and checking that flight plan in downstream systems, it then starts to become problematic. So from an exploratory testing point of view, or just purely from a testing point of view, I'm asking myself, what happens as a tester if I take a flight plan that contains duplicate blip codes, as they're called, and submit that as a flight plan to this system? All right. Now that would seem a reasonably simple check to make. All right. So it's just one example here of where you see these issues in real life, right? You understand the impact, the fallout from these issues, absolutely huge, vast impact. And you ask the question, right, how could this be prevented? So the source of this is from a UK newspaper site. This is from The Independent, all right? The collapse of the air traffic control system that caused major flight chaos and how it unfolded, all right? So it's a simple sequence of events, and in some ways the system behaving as intended. But with increased exploration, with increased exploratory testing, and doing things like injecting duplicate codes, could this have potentially been caught earlier? Who knows? Something very recently, probably less than a month ago now, CrowdStrike. And what we see now, this is a headline in today's press. So this is from, again, from the UK, the Sky News website. All right, CrowdStrike sued over global IT outage. All right, in simple terms, what are we looking at? We're looking at 8 million Windows machines that crashed last month, back in July, when CrowdStrike sent out a software update. All right. So from an impact point of view, this the issue that we see impacted on a wide scale, a huge scale. Again, airports, banks, hospitals, finance industry, broadcasting. I think Sky News themselves probably went off air at the time, or they had to fall back to their failover processes. All right. So yes, what do we see here? The CrowdStrike boss has apologized, and he's blamed a software bug as the cause for this. Let's look at this from an impact point of view, right? So this wasn't just the fact that these essentially Windows users had this blue screen of death, they couldn't use their machines, but from an impact and a fallout for the company themselves, CrowdStrike, all right? They lost 32% of their market value in 12 days, right? That's a loss of $25 billion, 19 billion sterling. On its market value. Absolutely staggering. Let's just take this a little further, right? So the software had been described as, the update has been described as validated, tested, certified. And yet, this is going to cost US Fortune 500 companies, over $5 billion US. Of course, this has been in the news. We've all seen this, right? But let's see what it was, right? So due to a bug in the content validator, one of the two template instances passed validation despite containing problematic content data. All right, so something by its very nature is designed to prevent these types of flawed updates moving through the CI pipeline and being deployed to production. The validator itself was at fault. there was a bug with the validator. So the testing of the validator in certain situations, proving that the validator does its job, finds these flawed updates. So, bugs in two areas, the update, but also the validator itself. This is the root cause for this. It goes on, the article goes on, and again, this is Sky News, also from techtarget.com as a source article, and also from the Verge website. Okay, so this is just having looked at various articles. All right, this is not our commentary, this is just what's already out there on the web. Okay, but it goes on to talk a little bit about CrowdStrike's testing process. So it says they do embrace both automated and manual testing on sensor content and template types, but it goes on to say it doesn't appear to do as much thorough testing on the rapid response content that was delivered on Friday. All right, so a possible gap in process there, as suggested by the article. A March deployment of new template types provided, quote, trust in the checks performed in or by the content validator. So CrowdStrike, as per the article, appears to have assumed that the rapid response content rollout wouldn't cause issues, and of course it did. The unexpected exception could not be gracefully handled, resulting in a Windows operating system crash, which I'm sure we've all seen many times, that infamous blue screen of death. I think, as it turns out, and again, I've not been witness to this or not been impacted by it personally, but I think it turns out the fix is essentially the removal of a particular file and a restart of the machine, and I think they spring to life again. But so CrowdStrike go on to talk about how it plans to improve its testing process moving forward. So prevent this from happening again, CrowdStrike is promising to improve its rapid response content testing. So that's the application under test specific increased testing coverage of that component, if we like, by using local developer testing. Interesting. Almost suggests that's not already happening. I'm not sure. It's just one interpretation. Content update and rollback testing alongside stress testing, fuzzing and fault injection. So two recent examples, one from last year, one from this year, with absolutely staggering impact. Not life-threatening in any of these situations, thankfully. This is more of an operational fallout and impact on a wide scale, within various industries. I guess if this were to have a particular impact on, in a hospital, in some kind of software that has life-threatening or life-supporting implications, it could have been far, far worse. But the impact here, of course, to users in this case, all right, to the company itself, all right, the financial damage and the reputational damage that's been done to the company here. But also going back to the air traffic control example, the impact to everyday users, 700,000 users who were stuck at airports and couldn't get home for, things they needed to do. Again, as I say, I had to get in a car and drive to Amsterdam to get myself and my wife and our family out of that situation. That's kind of the remedial action we had to take. So again, clearly testing coverage, a lack of testing in certain situations, or not enough testing in certain areas, is a contributing factor to both of these, no question. All right. So we have to be clear on risk in everything we do testing-wise, but especially with when we start to talk about exploratory testing. This is a real simple concept. The definition of this has not changed over time. But risk is two things multiplied together. All right, it's the likelihood or the probability of something failing in production by the impact or the fallout or the output of the outcome of that failure. So the likelihood of it failing multiplied by the impact of when it does fail in production. Why do we care? Because quite simply, when we have high risk tickets, we have something in our application, something that we've got to test, and we can apply this risk scoring mechanism to it, which we should all be doing as testers. When we get a high scoring item, we have to at least look again at the testing approach we are taking for that particular item. We cannot have a one size fits all testing approach for items in our backlog that have differing levels of risk. All right, in our world, in the test evolve world, we have an integration with Stripe as a payment mechanism, and that's hugely important to us. So as a feature, the probability of that failing, the impact of that failing, if I do that assessment, I come up with a high score, wouldn't be so much on the probability, because we're using a tried and true and well proven supplier, payment provider, etc. Okay, but the impact of it failing would be staggering for us. It would mean that we would be unable, as would many other companies using a Stripe integration, to receive funds, right? So that's a huge problem. So when it comes to me testing that, I've got to apply a different approach, or I've at least got to evaluate my approach to say, is what I'm doing fit for purpose for this high risk item? All right, so everything we're doing, we've got to understand risk, and we've got to use it as a driving factor to our approach. All right, so let's start to consider, right? We talk about shift left, we talk about high levels of automation. So in this world of automation, which is where we are, why do we still need manual exploratory testing? And I've got a couple of anecdotes there as well, right? Shift left is not the perfect solution to everything. Shift left is a powerful concept, and in principle, yes, we should absolutely be shifting more of our testing left, right? It's the way in which we do that, though, that's important. Shift left to some people means we don't have independent testers. Shift left to some people means we use our developers to do all of our testing. For the most part that's going to mean automated tests. All right, so you'll start to see where I'm going with this. I think the other thing here as well, all right, and as I say there, the true impact of AI, whatever your engine, whether it's ChatGPT, Gemini, whatever it is, the true impact of AI in software development, positive or otherwise, and this is the point, is not yet fully known. We don't know. We're in the early stages of this. For the most part, a lot of people are understandably eager to embrace this. We don't want to be left behind, fear of missing out, right? But we don't know where this takes us from a software development point of view and from a quality point of view, with increased input from AI engines. We simply do not know yet, which to my mind means an independent, a supplementary, but still a human-led, human-designed testing approach outside of pure automation becomes even more critical. There is a case here that says we rely too highly on automation. We rely too much on what the AI engine is telling us, right? We have to validate that for ourselves. We have to, okay? So why do we exploratory test on a manual basis then? For a number of reasons, all right? It will help us reduce risk, and it will increase confidence if you have your testers in your testing team doing some manual testing alongside your automation. Simple as that. I think it's fairly indisputable now, right, that the most serious bugs your team have raised or your customers have raised have probably been found when someone went off script a little bit. All right, when they went off the beaten path, when they did something a little strange, a little bit wacky, that's probably when some of your most problematic bugs were found and were raised and gave you the biggest headaches. It's not the routine stuff. It's not the tests that you probably have automated that are going to find you those edge cases. It's the exploration when people go off script. Okay, and as I said, users do strange things. You cannot plan everything in advance, right? And these are very much reasons why exploratory testing adds significant value. If we come back to some of our testing principles, all right, in the software testing world, and I think everybody can get on board with these, right? We cannot test everything. Exhaustive testing is neither possible nor practical. All right, and after a while, the return on that is going to diminish. So we can't test everything, and therefore, all our testing can do, all testing can ever do, is demonstrate that yes, you do have bugs. But the fact that you can't, or you don't, or you will never test everything cannot prove that you are bug free. It will never prove the absence of bugs. and therefore you can't find them all. You won't find them all. Again, this is why we need exploratory testing, right? And the the hard shift left proponents, if you like, that will suggest that our developers will do all our testing. Well, developers aren't paid to build a feature and then spend the next half a day kicking it about and doing exploratory testing. They're on to the next thing, right? So it's unreasonable, it's not practical, and it's incredibly unlikely that people will be using their developers to do this type of testing, which comes back to the argument of an autonomous independent testing team being a sensible thing. All right, we're not talking about manual testing now creating a bottleneck, right? We're talking about high levels of automation, both from the developer and from the tester point of view. But by doing that, that allows some of your human testers to do this exploratory testing, all right? The fallacy that your developers are going to do all of this is simply that. It's a fallacy. It's never going to happen, right? So the most quote unquote successful, mature testing practices, software delivery organizations that deliver consistently high quality software and have a raving fan base of customers will embrace both high levels of automation and exploration. They will always be delivering a higher quality product and a better user experience than the people that don't do that. Okay. Two very well understood principles here, right? So on the left here we have the automation pyramid, the test automation pyramid. Been around a long time. First suggested by Michael Cohn, and then on the right hand side from Barry Boehm, the idea or the widely accepted increasing cost of fixing bugs through from the requirement stage to the operational stage. All right, and we see that very, very steep curve from requirements through design. So even just from design and code, right? If we find something, at the coding stage, the cost of finding it there is suggested as being 10 times more than identifying a potential gap in the requirements. By the time we are through to acceptance testing, we're looking at something that's potentially 50 times more costly to fix than had we have conceptually found it at the design stage. By the time it gets to production, we're routinely talking about things that are, upwards of 100 times more costly than finding it, with static analysis at the design or the code or the requirements level. So, I don't think anyone disputes these models now. They've been around a long time. So where does exploratory testing fit here? Well, we come back to the pyramid. This is all good. We want to work with the pyramid, and in a agile testing practice, or if you use the idea of BDD and cucumber type tests in your delivery, then this is going to work very well for you. But we have our highest numbers, our highest percentage of automated tests at the unit testing level, of course. As we step a few levels up, most typically we might think of the API, the REST layer tests at that point. So we have a decoupled architecture and we have separate back-end and front-end releases for our application. Then you're going to have a high focus on automated REST layer tests as well. Okay, so not as many as the unit tests, of course, but automated API tests are great because they don't typically suffer from brittleness in the same way that UI-based tests do. But of course, next level up, you then have to have your more typical end-to-end automated front-end UI tests. All right, so you have to have the right ratios of those. But what we then see on the top of that is the ability to supplement that with your exploratory testing. So we'd suggest there's one level above all of this. Think of it as the star on top of the pyramid or the icing on the cake. You get the right ratios of all of these, you then have the freedom, the luxury, the encouragement, the support every sprint to say, right, let's take 2 or 3 of my testers and have them go and exploratory test a particular feature. All right, let's have them run a session-based test management session, particular feature. Let's look at our payment integration, or let's spend 3 hours doing extreme kind of cross-browser testing or cross-device testing, just random examples. But if you've got a good implementation of the automation pyramid here, you've got the right ratios, then you get to spend that time doing that exploratory testing. But you do have to have the automation in place first of all. If you don't have the automation in place and you then spend a good amount of time manually exploratory testing, it will yield results, of course, but it will be very slow. And that's the problem with too much manual testing. All right, so it just, again, heightens the need for the right ratios of both. Okay. So let's just talk a little bit more about shift left and what I call the automation silo, or this echo chamber. So I've seen it on projects where, if we're on let's take an organization, a project that probably is using BDD, working with features and scenarios. We get to stand up every day. We look at a board. One particular view may be, okay, where are we with the testing of, the XYZ feature? Okay, well, the XYZ feature has 6 documented scenarios within it. It's very natural and very common for the predominant focus to look at that and say, right, well, I've done 4 of the 6 scenarios. I've got 2 more to write tests for, to write the code for. And at the end of that, once I've done my 6 scenarios, which are probably more focused around the positive side of things, they're probably positive flow types of tests. Maybe there's 1 or 2 negative scenarios in there as well. What shouldn't happen? It's very common, it's very typical for the focus to be, okay, tick 6 scenarios, bang, 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 done, close the ticket. That's not uncommon at all. So from one point of view, yes, the expected automated testing is done. And maybe there's the suggestion that some exploratory testing has been done. But 9 times out of 10, it probably won't have been captured, or maybe it's not been done at all. So let's start to consider the concept of checking versus testing. Okay. Test automation of testing. Really what it is automation of checks. All right. It's only ever going to do what we tell it to do. Whether we are testing, again, functional, non-functional testing, if we are telling it to make a positive check on an expected system event, something that should have happened, or we're telling a test to refute that something has happened, we don't want something to have happened, we are giving it a very prescriptive set of automated checks to make on a consistent, repeatable, multiple times daily basis. But it's checking, it's not testing, it's doing what you've told it to check. Testing is always going to be human led. All right, we're all testing things every day indirectly. We get a new phone, we don't sit there and read the manual, we get it out and we start playing. Playing is testing, exploring, okay. But in the automation world, we have to be clear that automation is checking, it's not testing. But of course, we put it under the automation testing umbrella. It's only natural. So, again, our view and the view of people like James Bark, a pioneer in the testing world, and rightly so. Something having been tested means it's been checked, that's our automation, and it's been explored. Only when you've done those 2 things can you say that it's been thoroughly tested. All right. So using James Bark's own definition, all right, from the rapid software testing faculty in the classes, right? So what is exploratory testing? Well, it's the simultaneous, so all happening at the same time, the learning of the application, or the learning about the application, the design of tests on the fly, and the execution of those tests there and then. That's what exploratory testing is. All right. You can see why you've got to use the brain to do that. There is, however, a link back to some more traditional testing approaches, right? So the more you know about things like equivalence partitioning and boundary value analysis, right? These good old school testing techniques that will always remain relevant. The more you know about those, the more exposure you've had to those in a previous life. They just become parts of your toolkit. They become parts of your exploratory testing toolkit that you can use on the fly. You've got some kind of input on a field. Well, you look at your boundary value analysis. I go below, I go 0, I go on the median point, I go above, I try and go 500 above. That is boundary value analysis, equivalence partitioning, test design techniques on the fly. as you are exploring, learning about the application. All right, so there is absolutely a tie back to traditional testing and how useful these techniques can be in your exploration of your application under test. And what automation and exploration are telling us together, continued repeatability or repeating of the tests that you already have. They give you your security net. All right, they are going to tell you that things aren't regressing, that you haven't broken something, but they're not going to uncover more bugs. All right, or they're not going to go off the beaten path in the way that a human will. This is where variation is key, and this is where exploring takes you and what it gives you. Okay, but then we consider testability, right? What is testability? How testable is something? There's two things that have to be present for this, for something to be testable, for it to have good testability, right? You have to have control of the inputs, and you have to have visibility of a number of different things. You have to then take the test through its steps, the transition in states of the application, and ultimately you have to have visibility of the outputs, the UI, the REST layer, the logging, to understand what's happened or what's not happened. So it's those two things together, control and visibility, make something testable for you. All right. So how can we start to organize our exploratory testing then? Okay. Well, we can use charters. All right. Anyone that's ever explored anything, when the people first explored Antarctica, they had a charter. They had a vision for what it was they were trying to achieve. And this is simply what a charter is in exploratory testing. All right, we have to set a vision for what it is we're trying to do. We can't be too vague and we can't be too narrow with that. Okay, so again, I come back to this idea of a Stripe integration, for example. I might have something like, I want to spend a couple of hours exploratory testing our payment integration to make sure that I can purchase a business level subscription plan with a variety of credit card payments. All right, that's not too specific, and it's certainly not too vague. It has a particular vision, it has a focus, it sets the rules for what I'm planning to do within a time-boxed or a session-based exploratory testing session. All right, so let's use charters, right? Let's have a focus and a purpose. I have to align my exploratory testing with requirements. This isn't a free pass to just spend 3 days just looking all over the application with no focus. It has to have focus to yield quick return on investment. If I have a target and I drill that for 2 hours, and again we've seen this on projects in the last couple of weeks, where we've had very successful and high levels of automation, but minimal exploratory testing. And then within a couple of days of doing some intentional exploratory testing, we're finding 10, 20 bugs a day. And it's like a light switch has gone on sometimes. It's enlightening for testers, particularly those new in the industry as well, to see, okay, well, the automation's going well, but when I've switched focus and done some exploratory testing, look at all these bugs I've just raised. And what I'm doing my job as a quality engineer. I'm informing my delivery team about issues with quality of our application. And that's exactly what you're meant to be doing. So your charter, your focus, yes, you've got to align that to something that's in sprint, something that's being delivered, something that you can give a risk score to, but you've got to be mindful of the requirements, of course. You've got to some extent, work within these boundaries. All right, doesn't mean you play by the rules all the time, but you've got to have a focus. When you're having these discovery sessions with your product owners, all right, so when you've got these unresolved questions from of a product owner or developer, all right, when you've got those head scratchers and people can't give you a clear answer, these are absolutely things you're going to want to dive into with your exploration, because if we don't know how it's meant to behave, actually we're going to rely on our exploration to give us some of those answers. And that's what we're doing when we're exploring, right? We're asking questions of the application. And sometimes the answers are going to confirm, yes, that's what I expect, that's what I would like to happen. And sometimes it's going to tell us something we had no idea would be possible. And that's what exploring does. We have, some would say rather unfairly, but it's human nature. We have implicit expectations. We just expect things to work in a certain way. It's too easy sometimes. We say, well, it wasn't written as a requirement, and therefore, we cannot ever have expected that to have been built into the software. It's very easy sometimes to be that stringent, that strict with requirements, and it's, for the most part, it's important to work that way. It's also a little unrealistic some of the time. All right. Product owners are going to have explicit expectations. What do I mean? Of course, I expected it to work on Firefox. I didn't tell you that it needed to work on Firefox. I told you it needed to work on Chrome. I didn't mention Firefox. I didn't mention Safari, but of course I expected it to work on those. Of course, I expected it to work on Chrome 125 if it works on Chrome 126. You're not going to write down every single permutation by way of requirements. So as a tester, as a delivery team, like it or not, you are going to be working with implicit expectations. All right. So a session-based approach to exploratory testing. What do you need to provide? Well, as you're exploring, you've got to capture notes, you've got to make observations, you've got to raise bugs, and you've got to have the ability to debrief your stakeholders afterwards. To my mind, and we'll see this in what you can do within Halo now, your notes really talk about your coverage, right? What have you done within the confines of your exploratory testing? Where did you go? What did you see? What did you plan to do? What deviation in approach did you take? Observations, in my mind, are opportunities to improve. All right, we would say it's not a bug. It's not something that's in strict violation of a requirement. But as a tester, I think it's something that could be improved. As a user, as an explorer, I think it's something that could be improved. And we'll talk about this in a second. You've got to raise bugs. So where there is obviously a strict violation of a requirement, you've got to raise a bug. But more than anything, you spent 2 hours doing something. You need to sit down with your team, or maybe stand up the next day and say, right, this is what I did. This is where I went. This is what I saw. This is what I observed. These are the bugs I raised. You've got to have the ability, you've got to have the notes, the support, the capture to play this session back to the people that matter, to your delivery team. It's no good exploring for half a day if you can't accurately play back to people, what was done, what was covered. Okay. Something you can certainly do is get in early at the discovery level. You start drafting these charters or these intended focuses, visions for your exploratory test sessions. Do them early. All right, you can do that at requirement stage, because that's requirement stage. Discovery is when you're going to be asking these questions, and these questions should feed your exploratory testing as well. Especially as I come back to the point where questions are not answered at discovery, exploration is going to give you that. So use these discovery sessions. Shift left, again, that means bringing testers into discovery sessions at requirement stage. Use that to start thinking about charters or visions for exploratory testing. All right, so what are you doing? You're capturing these questions that you wish to ask of the application. As you explore, you're asking questions. What happens if I do this? Coming back to the flight plan, what happens if I stick duplicate codes on this flight plan and then submit it? You would think someone would have asked that question and exercised it at some point, but maybe that didn't happen. And then the thing that is very important to know, again, you may time box your session, say I'm just doing this by the clock for 2 hours or 4 hours. Another approach is when to stop. Okay, well, if I'm not doing it to a time, which probably you should, how do I know when to stop? Okay, well, we suggest that when you're no longer learning anything new about the application, or when you've answered all of your questions, that's the point to stop. All right. Now, when you are doing this planning, you do have a determination to make as well. Okay, so you have a question that you need to ask of your application. Now, is that question best answered with an exploration session? Or is it best answered and easily answered with an automated check? All right, because that's part of your role as well, is to decide how and when and where these things should be checked and or tested. Okay, I highly recommend you look at these two things. If nothing else in the exploratory arena, look at these two things. There's a YouTube video here by James and John Back, all right, from the Satisfice organization, all right, exploratory testing. I won't give too much away, but very insightful how something so simplistic can be tested in ways that you never would have thought of or explored. And then this book by Elizabeth Hendrickson, Explore It. It's always close to hand in the testing that I'm doing. And of course, when I was putting this webinar together as well. But it's a very, very readable book. Amazing tips for you as a tester, things you can embrace, patterns of behavior, heuristics, things you can consider that should all 100% be part of your exploratory testing approach. Okay. And then finally, before we start looking at what we can do within Test Evolve Halo, I want you to think about or reassess the Q, the quality and quality assurance. I'm not a big fan of QA engineers or quality assurers. I don't believe testers assure quality. I believe that testers report back on quality. I believe that testers test and find good and bad things that can be improved, things that need to be fixed. But do testers assure quality? Not to my mind. But the point of this, I want you to rethink your role. All right, sometimes we get too tied up with strict requirements. The best testers I've ever met, and the things that I would aspire to myself, have a common sense approach. We have to be able to say, look, I'm a user. I use apps on Android all the time, and we've got an app here. We've got a particular workflow that just doesn't make any sense. It could be perfectly in line with the design and the requirements, but you've got to be willing to put your hand up and say, look, this just doesn't work from a user experience point of view. All right, coming back to these implicit expectations, right? So use your common sense. Think about you as a user. If you were using the application from your company that you're testing, if you were the user, would that be a good user experience? And let that drive what you do as well as what the requirements say. All right. Don't beat yourself up over the bugs you don't find, because we've already said you're not going to find everything. It's just not possible. You're not going to exhaustively test that application. All right. But the best thing you can do is widen your perspective, broaden your horizons, think like a user. All right. Don't just raise bugs. All right. Bugs are just violations of requirement. Raise observations. Sit down at stand up and work with your project manager, with your developer, with your designer, and say, look, this is great, but I think this could be improved. What about if we did this? All right. What if we relocate this button? What about if we moved this form, later to stage 4 and not stage 1 of the process? Be a user, because that, as a tester, as a quality engineer, you are adding far more value to your team if you take on that type of perspective. All right. And let's think a little bit about user behavior finally. We have to test with different personas in different circumstances. I know that my parents use applications on their phone, or they try to, in a way that's very, very different to the way I do and the way my children do. But we're all users of the application, right? And, it's important that you test and you think like that where you can. Circumstances, right? If you use Chrome, for example, and Chrome driver and your automated testing as well, there are a variety of things you can do to simulate, bad network conditions, for example. Use these tools at your disposal to create different circumstances. What happens if I lose a session on my mobile and I kind of try and resume on my laptop? Think about these different things that are prevalent in everyday life, that are the reality of how people use applications in every day. We don't read manuals. We don't read user guides. Most of us. All right, that's just the truth of it. Right, we open something, we immediately throw the user guide, if there is one, on the floor, and we start playing. But we start, you know what I mean? We're playing, we're exploring, but we're not sitting there reading the hard and fast requirements, the user manual. So that has to guide some of your testing as well. As I said earlier, we test things every day. As a user, again, implicit expectations. We want sensible, intuitive, enjoyable experiences on our applications and our devices. People are frugal with their time, and they will give up easily. All right. If there isn't a clear and compelling reason for someone to use an application to do something, they will give up. They'll go away. They'll get on to the next thing. We are in a buy now, want it now society where we are not willing to wait, and especially if it's something that's not, the most exciting process in the world to do. If we have a bad user experience on a kind of an administrative function, a driving license application, or an application for purchasing a parking ticket, whatever it is, they're not the most exciting things in the world, and we're even less likely to use these things if we have a bad experience when we do so. So yeah, users are less forgiving these days. All right, it's very hard to convince people to spend their time doing or following a process that's painful. So these are ways in which you as a tester can start to think differently. But if you think about everything we just covered here, you cannot automate this. And that's the hard and fast fact. You cannot automate these different personas, circumstances, perspectives on how things work. You cannot automate an implicit expectation, but you can manually test for it as a human, as a user, as an explorer. And that's the mindset you're going to want to start to adopt. To Halo, all right, so there are, we've done plenty of previous webinars and tutorials about the levels of automation support that TestEvolve Spark and TestEvolve Halo will give you. This is Halo, this is our real-time cloud reporting platform. And for a lot of the time, we are, of course, focusing on real-time automated testing, as we say. So if you haven't seen that before, we have the idea of run cards. We can click in and we see this level of features and scenarios. We work hand in hand with BDD and Cucumber, and it's a real-time reporting platform. Essentially meaning that if you're running 500 tests, as soon as you have a single result for one of those 500 tests, a pass or a fail, you're going to start to see immediate results. And then we have click-through, and we have stack trace, and we have screenshots, and the ability to raise bugs to Jira, etc. But what we've added very recently now for the first time is this idea of exploratory testing support. So we've just spent 30-40 minutes talking about why exploratory testing is so important. And I said one of the key things you had to consider is the fact that you need to debrief people, right? You need to firstly do the exploration, the testing, but you need to capture what you're doing. And now for the first time within TestEvolve Halo, you have the ability to store your test automation and your exploratory testing output side by side for a release, for example. This is really powerful. All right, so let's have a look. So this is what we call an exploratory testing run card. It's now a manual payload, if you like, within Halo. It tells me that within this exploratory testing run, we had the idea of a single session. All right, so a session is something that belongs to a user. An exploratory run may be undertaken by a single user or by a team of people. If we had 3 testers, we might see 3 sessions here. And then sessions for each of those users consist of entries. All right, so an entry can consist of the idea of a note, an observation, or a bug. So these were concepts we've just been talking about. We like to raise notes to talk about coverage, what I did, what I tested, where I went. We should be raising observations when I think something could be improved but doesn't necessarily violate a requirement. Or of course I can raise bugs where there is a definite violation of that requirement. All right, but we do also support the idea of risk scoring, which we talked about. So the idea of impact by probability. Okay, so if I click into one of these, let's have a look at a level down here. So we see an exploratory testing session for some of the work that we're doing here. Now this is a session that's just one person's been working on. Andy's been working on that. So this is an exploratory run. We have a session on the left hand side here, and you can see on the right that within that session for a couple of hours, Andy's gone through and he's raised a note here, he's raised a bug here, another bug here, a note down here, a note down here. A very typical way of someone capturing their test output. You'll see here there's a description. This is where we would suggest you capture your charter, if you like, your vision for your exploratory testing, what you plan on doing. We have some timestamp information here. Okay, so when was this exploratory run started? When was it last updated? No risk score on this one, so we'll look at the creation of a new one in just a second. And currently this session is open, this exploratory run is open, but if I then come back onto the idea of my release, I get the power now, the benefit of my exploratory run output side by side with my automation. So when it comes for a typical release go, no-go decision, I've not just got a view on automation, I've got a view on my whole quality perspective from my testing team. which is an incredibly powerful thing, right? So how do we do this in Flare? Right, so we can start from our unassigned labels page here, or from any particular node. Up on the right-hand side here now, we have the idea of create a new exploratory test run. So we do this. If you're familiar with Flare, you'll know that we have the idea of labels. So labels within Test Evolve, Halo, sorry, not Flare, and within Spark denote a sense of purpose for either an automated test run, or in this case, an exploratory test session. So I can either use existing labels, or I can create one myself. So I might say here, explore the new Stripe payment integration. Help if I can spell some of these things as well. There we go. Let's just go back. Wow, that's terrible. Cool. So I can create my label. Explore the payment functionality for 2 hours with focus on credit card payments for business plans, for example. I go in here. This is a big deal for us. The impact is 3, but it's a high quality provider of the software that we're using, that we're integrated with. So I'm just going to give that an average likelihood. I could give that a 1, but I create my run, and I get my empty run, essentially my shell of my exploratory test run. So it's now showing my risk score there as well. Okay. What do we have here? Well, we can add it to the release from this point of view. So if I just were to add this to the releases we have, we were just looking at the Flare 8.15. I'm going to add it onto that release, confirm. And then from that point forward, I can click here into my release and I find my exploratory run here. All right. So I open that up. It's empty, as we say at the moment. All right. So, but the idea is that as a first user on the exploratory run, I need to create a session. So this becomes my session. It's currently open. We see the stopwatch ticking there. All right, so my session is underway. It gives me a summary. I've got no bugs, no observations, no notes yet. All right, but I need to create some. So I come over here, I create a new entry. And in a notes section, tested today with Firefox, Edge, Safari, and Chrome. All latest versions. Tested multiple MasterCard payments, etc., etc. You get the gist, and you can save that. All right. So that's me adding a note, which we would recommend you use to talk about coverage. What did you do in that session? There's no limit to any of the numbers of any of these, but go to town with these. Right. This shows the value you're adding as a tester. It tracks your coverage, and it allows you to do this debrief. So the next day at stand up, you get to play this back and said, right, these are all the things I did, the things I tried, and then, okay, well, there's a bug here. So I've got a different, I click on the drop down here and say, right, I actually need to raise a bug. So couldn't complete a MasterCard payment in Safari, error received, paste, stack trace, etc. All right, so I get to raise a bug here as well when there's been a strict violation of the requirement. I save that. In the very near future, we will, of course, be adding both screenshot and video-based capture. All right, so, of course, when you raise a bug, you're going to want to attach an image or a video to support that. So support for that within Halo, within this feature, is coming very, very soon. And the other thing I can do, as we say, is raise an observation. Okay, so the workflow is fine, but the experience is terrible. Again, excuse my typing there. Use these observations to highlight opportunities for improvement, as I keep saying. All right, and again, you'll be able to attach video and screenshot evidence here. But this is one session, so if we get another 2 or 3 people in on this, all right, you're going to start to see these different sessions on the left-hand side here. So there'll be a session for each user. Anyone within the project, within Halo, can come into this exploratory test run view and click on anybody else's session and look at their coverage, look at the bugs they've raised, look at the observations they've raised. So it becomes a collective focus on the team effort for this exploratory run, which has a particular focus, which in our case, our example is to explore the new Stripe payment integration. All right, all three of those people that had a session each are committed to exploring, that shared vision, that shared function, right? They've all got the same remit, which is to go in and do that. But they're all going to go in and do it slightly differently, right? They're going to find different things. They'll try different things. They'll raise different observations. They'll have different perspectives. One of them will have operated as a particular persona. Another one will have operated as a different type of persona. Different circumstances. One of them could have been on a Windows machine, a Mac, etc., etc. So their notes will tell us all about what they did. All right, so this very quickly builds up over a 2-hour or 4-hour session. You get a raft of information here about the quality of that particular feature within your application. All right, so as a user, when I'm done, I want people to know that I'm finished. I've finished my half a day or my 2 hours. I just end my session, and here I get a chance to summarize. All right, so I don't have to do this, but it's a good way of saying something like multi-browser coverage, all MasterCard variations, one low level bug raised, couple of let's check my spelling, good lord, observations, but on the whole a good experience. All right, so you have the opportunity here to just introduce a bit of a summary, and that's going to sit there at the top of your session. All right, so that's been done. Whilst anybody can go in and read every single note, of course they can, it's also very useful to have a tester's summary of their session at the very top so we can get to it very quickly. All right, so yes, I can end my session. Now I have this green tick against my session. All right, only when everybody's individual sessions have been ended can we then go and close that run. All right, so that will be the conclusion of that particular exploratory testing run. Okay, so when we then come back to that release, we can see here that our exploratory testing run, I'm looking at the wrong one, it's this one over here on the left. All right, we have a nice summary now of exactly what's been achieved. I had however many sessions from however many users. We had this many entries. We get a view of the risk score. Our view here would be that if you've got a high level risk score, I would be expecting more than just one tester, for example. A high level risk score might suggest that 3, 4, 5 different people need to take a look at this. The more people I have, the more sessions, of course, the more entries I'd expect to see. Certainly, I would expect to see lots of notes. The notes are going to talk about the coverage, how much people have done. I'd like to see observations, because observations, opportunities for improvement are a good thing, right? That's a tester thinking outside the box. I think I'd be slightly concerned if I didn't see some observations, right? And ultimately, hard and fast bugs. All right, and I can see that this run is closed. Okay, what we can then do, as we can with any of these runs in Halo, I can mark this as frozen for the release. Marking something as frozen for a release says the activity is complete, the output has been reviewed, maybe I've raised bugs and they're added to the backlog and we're planning them for the next sprint. But for this release that I've got to get out of the door, the testing is finished, I'm happy with the output, I've frozen it. That is my snapshot in time of our quality position there and then. And we are therefore, or not, good to go for that release. All right, so that's the concept briefly of freezing releases. All right, but I think what you see here, the ability now for the first time to have your exploratory testing and your automation side by side, and bearing in mind we offer support for a variety of different types of automation: visual testing, lighthouse auditing, accessibility testing, functional automated testing, alongside exploratory testing as well. You have this platform now. You have this view, a view that you can share with your stakeholders of holistic application quality. All right, so we think that's a very powerful thing, and I hope you're really going to enjoy using this. Okay, so as always, We offer a 30-day completely free, fully featured trial. So if you think this could potentially be of use to you and you're looking at ways you can increase your agile testing maturity, then we think this will help you to do that. All right, so we have a 30-day free trial. Please do go look us up at testevolve.com, and we'd love to hear from you. All right, so this is, we are still testers. This is everything we do, but as a platform thought about, designed, conceived, by testers with things that we believe are going to add value to other testers' everyday lives. And this is one of our latest features that we're really excited about. So yeah, please do look us up. 30-day free trial. Thanks for listening today. I hope that's been of use. It's designed just to get us all thinking a little bit more about the ongoing part that exploratory testing, manual testing, as a user, as a human, is always going to have, and how you can now bring that together side by side with your automation testing to help you as a tester or a test manager answer those questions to your project manager and say, yes, the application is in a good state quality right now, and yes, we can release. We have good exposure to the current coverage. We've raised bugs, we've raised observations, we know where we are, and we're good to go. And we now have this snapshot in time should we need to look back. All right, so thank you for your time. Go look us up. Why not sign up for an evaluation and see what this can bring to your agile testing process. And we'll see you soon. Thank you.